And they're like, well, this guy's going to have to look over your code and give it the rubber stamp and say whether it's good enough. I'm like, what? Oh my God. Oh, that's terrible.
What does mindset have to do with software engineering? Well, basically everything, as we'll see in this conversation. Hi, my name is Nick Cosentino, and I'm a Principal Software Engineering Manager at Microsoft. In this video, I was joined by Rich Donovan to talk about mindset in terms of software engineering, and how it shows up in all sorts of different places. Rich shares his experiences and his unique journey in his career, and along the way all the lessons that he learned that accrued towards mindset being important for software engineering. Personally, I think the framing in this video is incredibly important to think about, because without mindset as a focus, we don't have the awareness to go create positive change in a lot of the things we do, which extends well beyond just software engineering in general. I think that you'll enjoy this conversation and hearing yet another example of different career journeys from other people. So sit back, enjoy, and let me know in the comments if you like this kind of thing. Thanks, and I'll see you next time. Give us a little rundown for what you've been up to, how you got to where you are, and kind of like a bit of that journey, and kind of preface the conversation with like a little bit about you.
Yeah, absolutely. So come from a small town in the northeast of England called Middlesbrough, and it's one of these towns where I think people don't feel like they have many opportunities there.
Okay.
I certainly didn't, and I went to one of the worst schools in the country. Like, you know, no one makes anything of themselves that goes to that school. Many people around that area kind of enjoyed a bit of burglary and drugs, and you can basically bet your bottom dollar that many of them have done time. So it wasn't the greatest environment to kind of kick off with, but I remember thinking, I was in around my third year at school, so maybe I was about 13-ish, and a career officer came into the school and they're like, oh, do you know what do you want to do with yourself? And to be honest, I had no idea. What I wanted to do. And the only real answer that I had was, I want to leave Middlesbrough.
Sure.
That was
okay.
it. That was it. Like, whatever it is I'm going to do, I have to leave Middlesbrough. So that was interesting at such a young age. And when I actually did come to leave school, I still didn't know what I wanted to do. I was into my fitness, running, football, all of that stuff. So I enrolled on a sports course at college and thought, let's do something with that. 6 weeks in, I did a bit of reflection. I was like, where is this actually leading? Like,
Okay.
It's kind of fun. It's kind of interesting, but is there a job at the end of it? And bearing in mind, this was still in Middlesbrough, I decided that there wasn't. And I went back to my secondary school form teacher and just kind of had a chat with him, because it's not really in my nature to kind of give up on something. And
sure.
So I was like, I'm basically going to be a college dropout. I don't want to do that. What am I going to do? So I speak to my form teacher, and he's just like, look, you're a smart kid. Like, whatever you want to do, I'm sure you can do it, and you'll make the right choices. So I was like, fine, okay. So we binned that off, and I took a job as a trainee apprentice type thing, building computers,
Okay.
So building PCs and that kind of thing, and that was interesting. And at that point, I'd sort of decided that computers were where it was at, and I did that based on this really complicated formula, and that was, what do I think is going to get me the most money in several years' time? And I decided it was computers. So I'm kind of doing that, and one day out of the blue, my eldest brother, he's living a couple of 100 miles away from Middlesbrough, in a place called Grantham, and he's working for a software house. I didn't even know what a software house was. And he rings me up one day and he says, Rich, I've got a job for you. You'll be at the bottom of this company, but you can go anywhere within the company if something takes your interest. And I'm like, oh, okay. And basically on the call, he then followed that up with, obviously, if you take this job, you'll have to leave home. I was like, okay.
Sure.
So on the call, I'm like, yeah, all right, I'll do it. so I go home that night, and I'm like, hey, Mom, I'm leaving home. Packing my bags. Like a couple of days later, I'm on the train, and I'm heading to a town where I don't know anyone apart from my brother. And
were you just
so this
very
job,
ready for a change? Is that why the immediacy of it? Or just are you more spontaneous by nature? I'm just curious.
I know I'm not. I don't think I'm super spontaneous, to be honest. I think it was just like, the thing that really got me kind of thinking was, oh, you're at the bottom, you can go anywhere. That was the thing. It was like, okay, that's given me some kind of path, and I'm like,
Right, okay.
yes, and that kind of thing really appeals to me. I'm very much of the thought that you get for what you work for. So when someone puts something like that in front of me, I'm like, that's an opportunity for me to kind of earn my path,
right.
if you like.
You get what you put into it, right? So, okay, no, that's cool. And sorry to interrupt you. I was just like, wait a second. No. That's a pretty spontaneous thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty random. I was only 17, and when I think about it now, I'm like, it surprises me. I'm like, I wouldn't make such a big decision like that now. I'd be like, whoa, right. What? So anyway, so this job happened to be what I call a point and click tester. And so it was over 20 years ago, and they basically said, look, here's this thing on a computer and a mouse, click around, and if it breaks, tell us what you did. That's your job. That's all. And I'm like, oh, okay, this is easy. But for me, again, part of my mindset, like, they've had to replace various testers in this role because they've just got bored and they've just gone, this is mine, can't be bothered with this. And I turned it into a game. I'm just like, hey, how many of these can I find? And so I'm doing all random things and in random orders and all these kinds of things, not really knowing what I'm doing. And I'm finding loads and loads of bugs, and I'm like, I'm enjoying it. And they're like, wow, this is amazing. You're like, you're a really good tester. Like, I'm just having fun. But the main thing was, like, the very first bug I found, took it to one of the developers there, and he had a look at it, and it. I remember one bug actually. It was literally something was meant to change color, and it didn't change color. It was just like a label on a form, and I go in, and I'm like, oh, it hasn't changed. And the developer's like, oh no, oh, that's going to be a nightmare to fix. And I'm like, is it really? Is it really? No. Oh, right, okay, fine, good one. And then I found another one, and anyway, I go to him, and I'm like, here's these bugs. He's like, give me 10 minutes. Goes back, he goes, try again. And so I try again. It's all working great. And I'm just like, how did you do that?
Right, okay, yeah.
And that was it. That was the step. That was the first step. And this guy just, he's a really, really nice guy. And I was fortunate enough to be surrounded by some really good people at that time who were really appreciated my interest and my enthusiasm, and then they jumped in on that and were like, oh, he's really into it, let's help him. And they just pointed to the programming books on the shelf, and they're like, there's a lot of those up there, start reading and you're good to go. And I was in a town with no friends, so that's what I did. Took the books off the shelf, took my laptop home, started reading, started building. 6 months later, I was a junior dev working in Visual Fox Pro. Would you believe?
Nice. Okay.
And then a couple of years later, the entire company was rewriting their entire software suite in C#.NET 1.0.
There you go. And that's history.
Yeah. And so I was like, wow, this is a great opportunity, and yeah, just spent another couple of years there. And at that time, I was like, I had 2 years experience in C#.net at like 18, 19, whatever. And hardly anyone else in the industry had that amount of experience with it.
Right.
So suddenly I was like, people are like, oh, wow, oh, you've got this, oh, you've got this. And I was like, hey, great stuff. So yeah, great, really, really, really into it and all of that stuff, really kind of enthusiastic to learn new things and all of that. And then, yeah, just jumped. I jumped a few companies like relatively quickly, like a year to 2 years, to kind of hike my salary because that's what I was thinking about then.
Yep.
And yeah, found my way over to Norwich where I am now, and yeah, I've just kind of worked through a number of roles: senior dev, tech lead, engineering manager, software architect was my last role at Aviva, a fairly big insurance company in the UK. And yeah, from there, I had what we might call a midlife crisis or something close to.
I was curious to get to this point, right? Because we were chatting before, and the career. I wanted to kind of mention the career journey part for me is very interesting, and I think it's good for the audience to hear about that too, because there's so many people that they're going to be at different points in their career journey, right? And some of them are at the point where they're like, they haven't even started. They're very young and they're like, I don't know what I want to do. Is this for me? There's people that are, they're already in their career and it has nothing to do with software engineering. And they're going, can I do this? Like, there's so many different perspectives. And I think the more that I hear people sharing their journey and the more opportunity people hear, like, hey, look, not everyone was like, I'm 5 years old and I know I want to be a software engineer. I'm going to start, learning Rust and JavaScript, at age 5, 6, 7. Like, not everyone's doing this. And I think that especially on social media, we see so many examples of all of these people. Like, I started so early. This was, in my blood. And it's like, that's not the reality for most people. And that's totally cool. There's still an awesome career path for you. So, yeah, it sounds like for you, at least you did kind of know relatively early, like you had a bit of a change in the beginning, but kind of were on your software journey relatively early. But, some people I've talked to, it's at age 30 later, like, and it's totally cool. It's fine. So, midlife crisis now. Let's hear all about it.
Yeah, so sitting there at my desk, having a bit of a slow day, as happens now and again, and I'm just kind of reflecting, having a little few thoughts about the future, and then I have this like fairly morbid thought, and it goes along the lines of, if I'm laying on my deathbed and I'm looking back on my life, and between now and then I continue down this path and I just sit at this desk and this keyboard and I tap away and I do the things that I've been doing for most of my life, which is, to be honest, not being particularly sociable, not being like super nice to people when I could be, being quite pessimistic about various things, all of that stuff. And I'm thinking, do you know what, if I continue doing that and I get to the end and I look back, and let's just say that the time that we do have here is all the time that we ever have, I'm just thinking, am I going to be happy looking back? And very quickly that answer was, well, no, I'm not. So, and then that was followed up quicker still by, okay, so what the hell are you going to do?
So what?
and it's interesting because like the as soon as I started to think about it, obviously it involved a transition of some kind. If I'm not doing this, I need to do that. And the very next thought is, well, how do I match my salary doing something else? And it's like, that's pretty much impossible, like straight away, right? I've been doing this job for 20 odd years, and Um,
And especially that was
and
one of your goals you said in the beginning, right? Like you said, I want to do this because it's something that will pay well. And I don't think there's
yeah,
anything wrong with that. I think, people's livelihoods, can be dramatically affected by their income level. So people picking jobs, being like, I want to do something that makes me good money. Some people might say like, oh, that's like, the wrong way to look at it. It's like at some point, like, income for people, I would say beyond a certain point starts to be like, okay, like you're not really getting much more out of it. But there are levels are pretty high that you can still be like, more money will actually help me in my life. And this is going to be different across the world, of course. But I just wanted to mention, like, yeah, it kind of makes sense if you were like, I'm chasing money in my career, and now you're going, if I need to switch, like, am I just resetting on that? That's a pretty big kind of oh crap moment.
yeah, and I think the interesting thing about the money as well is like, um, at various points in my career, and this kind of feeds into some of the mindset stuff as well. But um, at, in some of my earlier years, I was working with some contractors, and they're on day rates that you think, wow, how is that happening? And you have these thoughts like, wow, like no one would ever pay me that amount of money to do that job. Like if they're getting paid that much money, they must be like fantastic.
Right.
Um, and it didn't take too long to realize that these people were very average. Is probably putting it kindly. Yeah, no, I mean the honesty of it is that just because someone's a contractor, there are fantastic contractors,
Of
there
course,
are
yeah.
average contractors, and there are poor contractors, just like permanent staff doing their normal jobs. And that that takes a little bit of time to realize. But just that day rate, as I said, thinking about the money, I was like, one day I'm going to do that. And when I thought about it, it was like, it's not going to be now, it's not going to be next year, it's not going to be 2 years. Like I can't even really see when it would be, like, but
Right.
it's there. And it's one of those things that we might touch on in a bit. But I kind of consider that like directional focus. So it wasn't necessarily a goal. Like I didn't write it down. It
Sure.
kind of was a goal, but it's just something that meant more than most things when I thought about it. Let's put it
Okay.
that
Yeah.
way. And then that triggers something, and then every now and again something comes up, and it's like, ooh, how does this fit that situation? Could this push you
Right.
towards that, and that kind of thing. So that kind of played in somewhere along the line, and I did do that for several years, and that that played a big role in why I was able to do what I'm now, well, that what I'm about to tell you, or at least like the decision I could make, which obviously not
Right.
everyone can. So yeah, I'm sitting there. I've earned a decent amount of money. I've got maybe several years' salary in the bank, if you like, um, and so I start to think about all, what on earth am I going to do? How, if I'm not going to do this, what is it going to be? And for me, that it's such a strange thing to talk about it when I think about like who I was then and how
Right.
I was then, because the decisions I was making didn't match the person I was. So I was like fully like somewhere else, or was kind of like making a decision knowing that I needed to be someone else
Ah,
practically.
that's
So
a very interesting way to frame it. Yeah. Okay. That's
yeah,
cool.
yeah, I don't even know where those words come from, because I don't even know how to articulate it, if I'm honest. But I'm like, even the sentence I basically said to myself was, I want to work with people more. And that sentence in and of itself is just like so far away from the person I was. And I was this person who hates meeting strangers, doesn't even like being introduced to like new teammates when they come and join the team, don't like speaking up in meetings, like all of these things which are very people related. might lead you to think that I don't really like people very much. So, and some people definitely thought that about me. That's for sure. But I just when I was trying to think, what am I going to do? I just felt that there was something inside that I've not been using, and that thing could be put to far better use. And I just think that I can help people, I can benefit people in a way that I've just not really tried, even though I knew that I could. And so then I suppose you start to think about things like purpose and that kind of thing. And so that kind of became my purpose at that point. And I had to start to think about, one, what that looks like. Who am I going to be effectively? How am I going to do that? But also that there's like the business side, and then there's the upskilling of myself, and not just from like I'm going to be a mindset coach and I'm going to learn about mindset, and I'm going to be a personal trainer. I'm going to learn about the communication side, the things of just feeling comfortable in a conversation.
Right.
I remember I used to, like, I've spent so much time away from my family that even when I'd go back to Middlesbrough, I'd feel awkward in a social family situation, and I'm just surrounded by my brothers and their partners, and I'd feel like super awkward about it, and I had no idea where that came from, but it doesn't.
Did you find that when you were working, like, and I know this is over a huge period of time, but you had talked, about moving away from home and stuff kind of early on there. Did you find, and I don't know, this might be kind of personal, so you don't have to like touch on it too much, but like, did you find that you were you mostly like isolated, or did you like find it very easy to make friends and stuff when you moved away? And I know this is over a course of years, but I'll kind of touch on some of my experience too that might be similar, and I'm just curious to hear from you.
Yeah, I think so. In general, quite isolated. I'm not an outgoing person, and I think the thing that saved me, if you like, was my fitness and my interest in physical activity. So going to the gym, yeah, I'll chat to someone at the gym. Not much, but like, I'll say hi, and if you go enough times, you'll see someone regular, and yeah, fine. The biggest thing that saved me from a social perspective was that I used to play 11-a-side football on a Saturday and a Sunday, and obviously two different teams there, so you tend to be relatively close with your teammates, and then you go out on the weekend and that kind of thing. So I think that's something that saved me, but that's another side of kind of me as a developer, and kind of what I try to encourage in other people now, is that that's not a side that many people will associate with a software developer. And in actual fact, a lot of software developers don't have that side. And so if I didn't have that, I would have been very isolated, because it's not in my nature to make something happen in that kind of situation.
That makes sense. I wanted to ask this because for me, for about 8 years out, like just after university, I basically developed like an extreme amount of social anxiety. And I used to be like in university, like we'd party and stuff, and I was fine with that. I was always like nervous to approach new people just because not a lot of confidence and self-esteem. But like if I was at a party with my friends, like I would be totally fine. If we hosted parties, I would be totally fine. But over the course of that 8-year period, it was like the only confidence I had was at work. And if you put me in any social setting, including like you were kind of saying, it was less about visiting my family, but more even about my friends from back home, right? Like my high school friends, and we're all growing up and kind of going in slightly different directions. But if it was like, hey, we're going to so-and-so's house, I'd be like, oh, there's going to be people I don't know there. And then I would start to have anxiety about like, how do I interact with these people? They're going to say like, what are you into? And the only thing I can say is work. So unless you're talking about digital forensics and C# with me, we're not going to be able to have a conversation. And it was pretty terrible. Like, so you kind of said the thing that saved you. For me, yeah, like the gym was a huge part, and I ended up getting a dog for myself. Her name's Lila. And I always attribute like Lila being the thing that saved me, because it gave me something else to be responsible for outside of work. So anyway, I just wanted to share that, because I'm sure there's other people too that they might feel like, for whatever reason, a little bit of isolation. Software engineers, stereotypically, we're not like the most super outgoing people. But yeah, it can look different for everyone. So anyway, not to derail your story again, I apologize.
No, not at all. I think the story just interweaves into God knows what. Can't even remember where we got to. But it's a super important point, and as I said before, like it's something that I encourage so much. Like even for people to learn new skills outside
Right.
of tech, and it doesn't necessarily need to be super useful, but it will be interesting to someone. And so I when I recognized this, I started to do various things, and I mean I did a lot of running, but then I wouldn't just run. I'd also read about running, and then I'd read about running training, and I read a book called Chi Running, which was just random for me to read. Like who reads Chi Running? But it's super interesting, and then suddenly you find that these things are just coming up in conversations with like random people, and I spent time studying like body language, and again it's super interesting, and then once you start talking to someone about it, they're like, oh wow, and you can just talk and talk and talk and talk, and previously you had nothing to talk about. Just what you described. I've had that with partners in the past, where I've gone home from work and I've had a particularly stressful day, and I've tried to talk about it for about 30 seconds until I see my partner's eyes glaze over.
Yeah.
And then I'm one of those people that just stops talking. Like
Yep.
I don't have any time to like just talk and sort of keep up appearances for the sake of doing it when potentially the other person not listening. Like it's not that they weren't listening or interested per se. It was just like, oh, I don't really know what you're talking about, and I can't understand it, and that's fine. But
Right.
obviously the result of that was like, well, I'm not going to try and tell you that now, and I don't have much else to talk about because that's all that's occupying my mind. Right. And then that's all just then internal, and there's no outlet, right? So yeah, it's I do think it's such an important and overlooked aspect of anyone becoming a software engineer. Is it, of course we need to code to improve our coding, but if all you do is just sit in front of a computer and code 24/7, like it's only going to take you so far. Like, and before you know it, and I'm not even just talking about socially outside of work, before you know it, you're just going to hit a ceiling, even in the job, because you need that social side. You need to be able to speak to people. You need to be able to communicate. And I learned that far too late for me in my career. And when I started to see the difference it made, I kind of looked back and I was like, wow, imagine if I knew if I knew this then. Who knows?
But this is kind of like it's maybe a good segue into the fact that you were saying, like, when you're kind of looking for this change and how you wanted to start approaching things differently, you were talking about purpose, right? And I know I think you've mentioned to me before, and I don't want to like try to quote you or something like that, but I think it was along the lines of like, if I'm able to start helping people, like you can be in this position where you can be the person that like would have helped yourself, kind of thing. I don't have a good way to put that, but yeah, you can be the role model and the educator and the helpful person that you wish you would have had, if that's maybe a better way to say it.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I'll tell you what, let me just kind of jump to the end of that story, because we're pretty much there and I can drag it out for hours. So yeah, basically I'm a software architect and I go through this random transformation in which I come up with this idea of eventually, anyway, deciding to be like a mindset coach for software engineers. And I'm looking around and I'm like, are there any others out there? Obviously, there's lots of mindset coaches around the world. And digging about, I couldn't really see any that were actually targeted for software engineers. And I kind of thought, well, on one hand, not too surprising that someone's not waking up every day thinking, I really want to work as software engineers. They're really nice, sociable people.
Yeah.
Which is exactly why, at least in my head, we need someone like me to do it. Because as you were saying there, suddenly, I've gone through this kind of like mindset coaching stuff. I've trained to become a personal trainer, and I'm kind of combining all of that. I'm seeing this well-being picture and the impact it has on mental health. And then I've looked back over my career, and I think of the many times that I've suffered, often internally. So it's really interesting, actually, because I've actually suffered a lot with confidence issues and speaking up in meetings and all of those kinds of things. And I've spoken to managers since I transitioned off into the kind of coaching side. And every one of them has said, would never have known. I would never have known. You always spoke up in meetings. You always said what you needed to say. And I was like, yeah, I did, because I recognized I needed to do it.
Right.
But that doesn't change the way I felt inside. It doesn't change how hard that was for me internally.
Right.
And that's not a way I want to feel. And it's not, and you don't have to feel that way. Again, I know now so much of that was what was going on up here. And yeah, again, linking back to what you were saying, I recognize my career, how much I could have helped myself if I'd have known what I know now. But also, I've worked with many software engineers, and I've witnessed so many people actually struggle like anything with the stress and the anxiety, and struggle with it far worse than I ever did. A lot worse than I ever did. And so again, I'm just thinking, well, who's in that space? Who's helping these people? And again, it takes me back to that point where I think, okay, so I'm the software developer, and this company tells me Mr. Mindset guy's coming in to help us all think great and boost our performance and feel fantastic, and I'm going to be sitting there thinking, who the hell's this guy? Like, what does he know about what I go through? What does he know about software development and the stress of production releases? Like,
exactly.
I wouldn't have gone for it, and I know a load of developers that wouldn't either. And so again, that's my reason why we need to fill this space with someone who has a career, if you like, or at least experience in the field of being a software developer. And for me, I mean, I've basically done it for 24 years. I've done it at various different levels. I've felt various things myself. I've seen various things from other people. And I just think that when I then broach that subject with software engineers, we don't really have that kind of, who's this guy? Because it's like, oh, this guy's done what I'm doing. And so he knows what this feels like. And I hear, like, I sometimes hear like companies say, oh, so you're offering to support our engineers, you're offering to do sessions with them, blah blah blah, and they're like, oh, we already have that. And I'm like, do you? Who's doing that for you? Oh, well, HR do that. You don't have that. Right. Unless your HR people have got a career in software development and they're ex-software developers and they can really connect with your team, like, you don't have it. You're not doing it.
There's a big relatability aspect there where people, it's a lot easier to kind of have trust in someone when you can start to say like, oh, this person genuinely understands, and it's easier, I guess, easier proof to be able to say not just, oh, I know about this, I've read about it or I've kind of seen it, but it's I've lived it. I have lived it for years. So you become relatable. People start to go, oh, like this person does know what they're talking about, not just they seem to be able to talk about it in general. Like there's some experience here. So I can totally understand that. And even like as an engineering manager, especially with new teams and stuff, I like to remind people, like, I spent the first 8 years of my management career being an IC at the exact same time. I was coding every day and managing teams. So I like to be able to say, like, we're having difficulty prioritizing stuff and people want to do technical versus these other. I'm like, look, I get both sides of it. Like, it's, I'm not here to, like, be the manager trying to tell you everything to do. Like, I want to relate with you and, get on the same page. And I've found personally, like, that helps a lot when people go, oh, like, you can think like a developer still. You're not just like someone who's never done this before.
Yeah, and I think you're kind of touching on like sort of leadership there as well, and I think a lot of what I've learned with my coaching over the years and reflecting on all the coaching sessions of my own career and how I've behaved in certain roles throughout my career, it really changes my kind of thoughts and approach to leadership as well. Because I've certainly done a lot of things that you don't want to do.
Yep. Yeah, we all have. It's
but learned definitely learned from them for sure.
right.
And I think that's another kind of credibility thing to a certain degree. In that, even when I'm on LinkedIn, sometimes I'll say that I've done some stuff that people don't really say that they've done that. Like they're like, what? But I kind of feel like someone has to say it, and I'll say it with, yeah, okay, I did do that. What a stupid thing to do. I didn't realize that at the time. I realize it now. I wouldn't do that again. But
Yeah, it's
if
learning
you're
and growth,
reading
right?
this, yeah, exactly. And it's like if you're reading this, maybe that's you now. Maybe you're doing that now, and maybe this post gets you to just think for a second.
Yep, that kind of stuff is super helpful, I think. Like, it's, you share your experiences, and I think a lot of people, there's a bit of a facade with, like, I don't know, like, people want to present only their best self, but, like, you lose authenticity that way. And I think people, when they see others being authentic and being like, hey, I messed up, or hey, this wasn't the best way to do it, here's what I've learned, like, not only do you start to trust them more, like, they're not just kind of spewing bullcrap all the time. It's like, hey, like, this is a real person with real lived experiences. It starts to feel better. And kind of, I don't want to, this might be a bit of an abrupt jump, but when you talk about mindset, I had a conversation with Anna Miller. This is going back almost a couple of months now. And we were talking about branding. And one of the things that came up with branding was, I was like, look, we're talking about software engineers here. Probably the first thing coming to their mind is like, what the heck does branding have to do with me as a software engineer? And I don't want to say, like, jumping to mindset, people might say, what is this bull crap? Like, we're software engineers. Why does this matter? But it might seem foreign to them, right? They might not have ever thought about this kind of stuff. So, when it comes to mindset, and obviously you have a lot of experience with this now, how do you kind of approach software engineers to get it on their radar that mindset is so important versus just letting people kind of continue on doing what they're doing and kind of living in their bubble?
Yeah, well, to be honest, that's probably one of my biggest challenges. So when I started doing this and I first started talking about it, there wasn't too many people talking about this stuff on LinkedIn. And for a good while, I was putting stuff out there and I was just getting nothing back, like nothing. And I was just like going and going and going. And it is interesting because it is foreign to a lot of people, and it was foreign to me for a long time. And it's one of those things where there's a certain irony about it, where maybe the top 1% of software engineers might actually be interested in it, and because they can kind of see the the performance aspect of it. But the irony in that is that they're already probably the top 1% performing people, and actually it can benefit everyone else so much more than it can benefit them. So that's something that you grapple with. But the word mindset, people don't necessarily know what that even means. And my challenge is twofold. So it's like, engineers, hey, here's mindset. These are the kind of things that it can help you with, and how you can kind of benefit from looking into this stuff. And then the flip side of that is businesses as well, and how it can help their teams.
Right.
And that's also a conversation that many of them haven't even had or have never even heard of. So when that kind of thing comes up, it's like, what is this? What is this? But how do you go about it? Well, my approach has been LinkedIn, and effectively to build that following as big as I can build it, and to shout about all these things as loud as I can and as often as I can. And obviously, I've got my newsletter, the Modern Software Developer, which I always find like the name slightly funny, because I can imagine developers being like, oh, modern, oh, what, he knows these design patterns and these languages, and it's like, it's got nothing to do with any of that.
Yeah.
The modern software developer knows about his thoughts and his emotions and how to communicate and all of that side of things. But I don't really give that away too much in the title. So, but yeah, so there's all of that stuff. And again, it's probably it's a challenge for businesses as well, but it's all about awareness and about planting that seed.
Right.
And it's, for some people, you'll talk about mindset. I'll go through a session and I'll talk about some of the foundational bits, and they'll be like, oh wow, oh yeah, completely get it, and I'll run away with it, and they'll oh yeah, I can see this, I can see that. And then other people will just be like, yeah, and maybe it doesn't really sink in, but the seed's kind of being planted, and then it starts to seep into their everyday life a little bit, and they find themselves thinking about it a bit more, and that process can be weeks, it can be months, it can be years, but it sets something going and sparks an interest. And it might not be in mindset per se, it might be in self-improvement, and it might just touch a few other areas of kind of improvement and bettering yourself, and those kinds of things. Sooner or later, that all comes back to mindset.
Right.
But yeah, go on.
Oh, I was going to say, like, so when it comes to, like, practically speaking, because you've had to have many conversations with engineers at this point, and I'm assuming there's different themes or like repeat examples of things that come up. So when we're talking about mindset, are there, like, from your perspective, are there a couple of, like, I don't know if you'd call them like top themes or top scenarios where you're like, oh yeah, we've seen this pattern come up again, and like, here's how you'd kind of go coach someone through it. Maybe something that feels like, I don't know, for people watching, like, this could be a relatable experience to you. We can kind of walk through it and be like, here's how, when mindset is not top of mind for you, for lack of better phrasing, like, you're kind of living through this experience being like, man, I guess this is how it is. It kind of sucks, but I'm going about my day, versus when you start to have more awareness of these types of things, you can start to drive a positive change. I don't know if you have a couple of examples like that we could maybe walk through.
Yeah, I mean, as far as like common scenarios are concerned, it's quite interesting that when I do coaching, I always expect it to be very software engineer specific, and quite often it's not, which
Okay.
I find really interesting, because I'm really expecting it to be, and sometimes I'm expecting someone to just like misunderstand what I'm talking about, and they're going to start asking me technical questions, but it actually never happens. But
how do I optimize this loop in C#? And you're like, that's not the mindset we're talking about here.
Yeah, pretty much. But I mean, we kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier about, you know, where does mindset fit in within software development, and it's literally everywhere. But the very common things that come up time and time again, I mean, comparison is
Right.
a massive one, and everybody does it. And then, I mean, there's some very big common ones as well. There's burnout and the associated kind of thoughts and beliefs surrounding that, imposter syndrome, which I know you're very keen on as well. But if we take it maybe a step deeper into something a little more tangible, the code review is obviously a very popular one, something that nearly everyone will go through. Interestingly, when I first started development, we never did code reviews. Like, for several years, like there weren't any code reviews. Like, we just did our work and we did it and we built it.
Hey,
and
it works.
Shipped it.
Submit.
Yeah. Yeah, and if we wanted feedback, we'd have to go and ask for it, and that kind of thing. So the first time I went into a company and they were like, well, this guy's going to have to look over your code and give it the rubber stamp and say whether it's good enough. I'm like, what? Oh my God. Oh, that's terrible. That's an awful situation to be in. And even now, like, it's not that long ago that I had like my own kind of anxieties around pull requests. I remember several years back now, but it was I think it was at Aviva actually, and I'd created a feature. It grew arms and legs. I changed more code than I intended to change. It probably didn't look how I thought it was going to look, and before I knew it, I had this giant pull request, and I was like, "Oh my God, this is." And I got to the point of finishing it, and so I had the kind of relief. I was like, "That's that." And then I come to putting out the pull request, and suddenly, like, my head's just like, "Oh my God, like, what are people going to say about this? What kind of comments am I going to get about this? People are going to think I'm an idiot. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. I didn't mean to do it like this. It just happened." Right. Like, that sometimes happens. But I was like super anxious about it, and I delayed actually submitting this pull request for a couple of hours, just busying myself, pretending I'm doing something else, but just constantly stressing about this pull request.
And that was stress about that you were anticipating the feedback, right? Like, I know I'm gonna have to add Joe, Steve, Sally onto this, and they're gonna have some choice words, and like you're living this experience that hasn't actually happened. Like, you've invented it and you're living it now. So okay,
right, right, and so I'm anticipating all this stuff that, yeah, as you say, hasn't happened, might never happen. But I'm certainly feeling the effects of it, and eventually, you know, I can't delay it anymore. I press submit, and I get up from my desk, I walk away, and I run off to the toilet, and I just sit there for 10-15 minutes.
Yep.
Just because I can't just look at the screen. Yeah, I can't look at the screen and wait for these comments to come through, and it was so stressful.
We should pause. How many years into your career has this been when this situation happens? Like, years, about right?
50,
it's not like
about 15.
Okay, so for folks watching, like, if you're having anxiety in your very first, pull requests and stuff, you're hearing from Rich, this is like 15-ish years into his career where he's having an experience like this and going, oh crap, like, I'm having anxiety about this. It's a thing that happens, right? So I'm sorry, again, not to cut you off. I needed to call this out because it's like, I think more junior engineers think it's a very unique thing for them, but this kind of thing can continue to happen in your career. And this is why mindset can be so, so impactful when you're starting to reframe things. So I apologize again for the interruption, but
No.
15 years in, right? Like that's
Yeah.
something.
Yeah. And so, I mean, if we kind of analyze that a bit more and we get a bit deeper into, what's kind of going on there, it's, I have like a model that I share in my coaching and even in my mental health chats, to be honest, because it's just super useful, and it's basically something that I say that we all have what I call a well-being processor, and that well-being processor basically gets fed thoughts, and it kind of works with those thoughts, and part of what it does there is it produces like a cocktail of emotions based on that thought. So what we're saying is, if we have a thought, that is going to drive a way of feeling. So I'm sitting there about to submit this pull request, and I'm imagining X person who's sometimes a bit mean and doesn't put nice comments on pull requests. I'm imagining, oh, that guy's going to comment on my pull request and he's going to say, Rich, you're an idiot. What have you done this for? And at that point, I then start to feel like, oh God, like I'm going to look stupid. Like, I'm not the only person who sees that comment. Other people are going to see that comment as well.
Right.
And he's saying I'm stupid, and they're going to think I look stupid. Like, and so I'm starting to feel like that. And so in this well-being processor, we get our thoughts, they drive our feelings. How we then feel is going to drive our behavior and the actions we do or don't do. So in my situation, I'm procrastinating, I'm trying anything I can do to busy myself to not submit this pull request. And ultimately in the end, I'm kind of pressing the button and running away, all based initially on my initial thoughts. And if we carry that around, the things we do, the things we don't do, they produce a result. And we think about that result, and that goes into the processor, and that drives how we feel, and that drives what we do, and we go round and round and round and round and round. And so that's kind of how we're feeling the way we're feeling, and explain some of our behavior based on how we're thinking about a given situation. And I think the thing that a lot of people will struggle with is that the thoughts that enter the well-being processor, I'm not sure how I did that.
That's awesome.
Thoughts that
You made a heart.
The thoughts that enter the well-being processor, they come from two sources. One is your conscious mind. Therefore, you choose to think it. You actively say, this is how I want to think about this. And you choose that thought. And the problem is that a minute amount of the thoughts that are going through our processor are actually conscious thoughts that we choose. And the vast majority, are actually coming from our subconscious mind. And we kind of have less control over that. It very, very quickly, we control our subconscious mind indirectly. So we've basically trained it on a whole load of data from our conscious mind from our entire lives. And that is then kind of making sense of all of that data, and it's constantly throwing suggestions at you. Or it's almost like we're polling our subconscious, saying, how should I think about this? How should I think about this? How should I think about this? And it keeps trying to answer that question based on all of this data that we supplied it before. But for many of us, that data probably isn't optimal.
Mm-hmm. It's trained over so many years, right?
Yeah, and it probably doesn't represent the context that we find ourselves in, or it might not represent the person that we now are or want to be. And so I suppose there's kind of like a bit of a lag or a delay in the thoughts that we're just kind of getting thrown into our well-being processor. And if we're not aware of them, if we don't see them coming, then we just feel them. and we do
Right.
things based on them, and that drives our results. So our subconscious mind is effectively our autopilot in these kinds of situations. And so for mindset kind of coaching, just kind of practicing on that kind of thing, it's about recognizing and being aware of the thoughts that are kind of popping up in these situations. And to a certain extent, we recognize that we may not have chosen them directly.
Right.
And what's super important is we need to recognize that we don't have to accept them either. And we don't have to believe them, which so many people do. And if we think about the two sources, and these can keep coming in from our subconscious mind, what we can do at any point is we can override with our conscious mind. So we might put far fewer in deliberately, but we can recognize something that goes in, and we can be like, whoa, 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 that's not how I'm going to think about this. That's not how I want to think about this. I'm going to think about it like this. And that's, that's the thought I'm putting in. And that thought is going to generate a very different cocktail of emotions that actually makes me feel a certain way. And it's going to drive behavior that's going to be far more helpful to me. And that's the key behind what thoughts should I be putting in? Well, you put in the thoughts that are going to be helpful. And I say helpful and not positive or negative, because that's very subjective. And
Sure.
we might think of a negative thought that goes in, but that might spark someone into thinking, right, I need to do something about this. I'm going to take positive action. Well, that's then a helpful thought for that person, but it might not be for someone else. So we work out what's helpful.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's a really good point, right? About they are subjective. I think something else you mentioned too, that's it's really helpful to think about is, of course, the way that you framed it, someone listening to this might say well, that's easier said than done. And I think from talking with you before, yeah, it is easier said than done. But the point is that if you can start by at least recognizing, and it's not going to happen every single time a situation comes up, say on the pull request situation, you might say, hey, I want to reframe this, right? As this you're in this situation that comes up for all of us, right? Instead of going, all these people are going to say terrible things to me, and this is your subconscious mind kicking in, you could start to try and recognize, hey, this is happening again. And in the very beginning, that's all that you might get out of it. And that's okay to start, right? It's not I know you snap your fingers and it's yeah, I know you're not implying that it is that simple, but we start to work on this, we build awareness, and then over time we can start to more proactively, as you said, override the thought and kind of retrain. So I think that's super helpful framing. And maybe to summarize, because I know you, we kind of talked through the pull request example. I think that's such a good one, because I think anyone can relate to this, whether they're very junior doing their first one, or if they're, like you said, 15 years into their career and going, crap, here we go again. Everyone goes through this, but like I said, to summarize, there's a couple, or at least a few other things where this comes up a lot, right? And you mentioned burnout, you mentioned imposter syndrome. There are these other things that are constantly going on for software engineers. And I think, one of my big takeaways here is that if you can start by at least having some awareness as a very first step, that without the awareness, you can't start to take any action, right? You're just kind of hoping that things happen to change and progress. But if you can build awareness, you can start to position yourself to be like, oh, it's happening. Oh, it's happening. And you start to do it enough where you're like, hey, I'm catching it in the moment. Can we try something? And, as you're kind of saying, just build that retraining over time. So I think that's super cool. I think to some people, it might seem like a little bit it's a little bit woo-woo, that's kind of out there. But if you start trying to put it into practice, literally, after watching this, start trying to think of these situations where you would like to have a different result. And if you can start to identify them, no one's promising that it's instant change and everything's better, but like you can start to drive change over time. So thank you, Rich. I think that's super helpful for people to think through. And I'll follow up with you offline as well. But you kind of mentioned you have a newsletter. Where can people find you? I know LinkedIn's a huge spot. Where are the spots to find Rich?
LinkedIn is pretty much where I live, and as I say, I've got a newsletter, the Modern Software Developer, but I'll post about it on LinkedIn as well anyway. So you can basically find everything on LinkedIn.
Cool. Okay. Well, I'll make sure, like I said, I'll have that in the comments. I'll have it in the description so people will have that. Rich, I wanted to say thank you so much for the conversation. Any final words for the audience as a parting thought for them?
Just really, it's about kind of open-mindedness. This is all about open-mindedness, and a lot of what we do, even in software development, around building software, what we can achieve, what we can do, and the relationships that we have. Like, if we're open-minded, we can go places that we maybe haven't been before. And if we're closed-minded, we're stuck doing the same things over and over again. So it's about trying, even as you said, try it. See what happens. And that's, to be honest, that's how I started, because I was exactly what you said. This is a load of rubbish. I was talking specifically about affirmations, and I remember saying to myself, what a load of rubbish. And then I kind of caught myself, and I was like, I mean, you're saying it's a load of rubbish, but you've never tried it, have you? And I'm like, how? That's a good point. How can I sit here and say this? And so I did. I had something coming up. I think it was my first webinar that I'd ever done. I was super nervous. I had several weeks before it, and so I constructed 3 or 4 affirmations around that, around the delivery, around my own competence. And I repeated them every morning, every evening, and I honestly felt that it made a massive difference to me. And I was like, oh, okay, I was wrong. But also, just before I go, I want to know whether I can create that heart again.
I think you have to do one of these.
Yes.
I think it was. Oh, there it is.
So I didn't even mean to do it the first time, but got it down.
It was so natural too. Just yeah. Well, Rich, I really appreciate the time. I definitely want to find more time to chat with you. And I know, like, I've said this on the other call we had, like, imposter syndrome is a huge thing for me to talk through. Burnout as well. I would love to kind of pick your brain on those topics in the future. But again, thank you so much for making the time and sharing your thoughts with the audience.
Pleasure.
Awesome. We'll chat later.